So yesterday we saw the predictions from Professor Rob Ford on Twitter. We went over that, and over all of them, I do agree with most of them what he said. I think he does make some pretty good predictions. Of course, how accurate will they be? Of course, we await to find out. As he said himself, they weren't based on proper modelling or things like that. It was really sort of mostly guesstimates. But to be honest, I think he really drove home a lot of points of what I've been saying as well. That depending how much people take to tactical voting, that is going to have a very big thing. So we'll have to see how that all plays out. I do agree with him that the Greens are probably going to lose Brighton Pavilion and then probably pick up Bristol, depending on how those results are going out at the moment. Does look very close between them and Labour at the moment. But ultimately, the big question, I think the one that would have the most impact on a general election is whether or not Nigel Farage returns to lead Reform. Now, if he does, I think that would have a somewhat quite significant impact on the general election, especially on the Conservatives, because Nigel Farage has consistently said, especially this time, he wants to really destroy the Conservative Party. So he could very, very well ignore the Labour seats and just go specifically hard for Conservatives. And at that point, that could very much split the vote for Conservatives and do a lot of damage to them, especially in swing seats where they are trying to make every single vote count. So that I do certainly agree with. But then, of course, there is Reform if Farage doesn't return. They will maybe pick up some votes. I don't think they'll be in any proper MP territory, but I think if Farage does return to lead Reform UK, I think there might be a chance of maybe picking up one, like I say, maybe one or two from really dissatisfied, disgruntled Conservative voters. Maybe there's, of course, talked about maybe picking up some of like the 2019 seats, and maybe even some sort of right wing anti-establishment sort of votes as well. I don't think it's beyond the realms of possibility that might happen, but again, like I say, hence why I say I won't be shocked if they do manage to sort of win one or two, but I'm not expecting them to somehow run away wild and have 20 or 30 MPs in Parliament next time. I don't think that's very likely to happen, but would not surprise me if they manage to maybe pick up one or two seats. But I think that only happens if Nigel comes back. And of course, the big question, what if Nigel Farage comes back or not, is the question that many people, of course, are asking about how that happens. What happens in and around that, how exactly he comes back. There's, of course, would he run anywhere? We don't know, but we're going to look at this from the Conservative point of view today, because it is ultimately the Conservatives who would be to the Conservatives, Nigel Farage is easily their biggest threat come a general election. So we're going to have a look at Conservative Home today and have a look what their thoughts are, of course, about Nigel Farage and the potential upcoming general election. So before we do get into that, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off link called Buy Me Coffee Week 12, Buy Me Coffee. And of course, as always, there is a one-off link called the YouTube thank you button, and of course the Pony Club as well down below. So yeah, as always, thank you very much for all the support that you guys show, and of course, you can always support the channel by clicking like and the share button. So on with this. So this comes from Conservative Home with the title of "Oh Nigel, You're Such a Tease." The exchange is evergreen and goes roughly as follows. Interviewer breathlessly: are you talking to Conservative MPs about defections? Nigel Farage coyly: well, I can't really say very much, but conversations are certainly taking place. Clear space for the story in the Daily Telegraph and in our news links to come to think of it. Turn up the volume on GB News, and oh, by the way, let me just stress this: Conservative Home, bit of a tangent. Conservative Home recently found out that most apparently the viewers who are viewing GB News are also Conservative Home readers or avid Conservative Home readers and are conservatives. Doesn't really surprise anyone, to be honest, but there you go. Anyway, the feel, of course, Downing Street's pain, and of course, watch the Tory whips scramble. Is there a fifth column? Find them all. And all the while Farage, as he winds up the Tories and and flies them like a kite, nobody spooks them better. While Richard Trice talks of smashing the Tories, Farage hints instead he might just one day rejoin the party he left over 30 years ago, if it ever became, a real Conservative party again. Remember the palaver over the Tory UKIP pact. Farage's message is, of course, perfectly pitched to the kind of voter who backed the Tories in 2019, despises Keir Starmer, and is now flirting with reform. Smashing the Conservatives could put Starmer in power for a generation, but merging with them, turning the Faragists, and thus mending them, what's not to like, if you're that sort of voter anyway. By that same token, Farage, now triumphantly rejuvenated as a civil rights campaigner over his bank accounts and a fully fledged celebrity after his turn in the jungle, looks like the bloke you've just had a drink with down the pub, even if you somehow ended up paying. Whereas Trice has a square chin and a piercing eyes, could look like the boss who's just fired you. So, will Farage return to frontline politics of reform? Of course he will. And this is it. I am very much in the vein Farage will return. Although how much, of course, he will return, that is the question. Bear in mind, you would have to give up a lot of very lucrative media contracts, which potentially he could get back after the campaign. That is something that would probably take into mind. But he would have to give all that up just to start campaigning again. However, the benefits of that would, of course, definitely outweigh eventually the negatives. And I think there is more than likely a chance he will return. I do agree it's somewhere, I think, in the 60-70% chance rating. I really do think that. But we'll just skip that point. But the deeper question, of course, isn't whether he will twinkle at reform rallies and, of course, manifesto launches, but at how much work he's really prepared to put in. Surely there will be more psyops of the kind which this piece frugatively opened with. More hints of defecting Tories, secret talks, new donors, possible mergers, and vaguely but powerfully suggestions of the right recasting itself here as it did in Canada during the mid-2000s. Nonetheless, keeping reform at its present 9%, let alone getting it up to 13%, or so that UKIP won at the 2015 general election, is so far from guaranteed, to put it mildly. The Conservatives will, one, vote reform, get Starmer. It may work, it may not, but Farage would have to put his shoulder to the wheel, dialing down on his other work and home activities for the new party to deliver its potential. Downing Street and CCHQ cling to three reasons why he may not do so. First, Farage seems to be enjoying life, flourishing at GB News, settling down domestically, and making a bit of money. So he may want to sprinkle reform with a bit of his new stardust rather than put his shoulder to the wheel. That is, of course, as we said, giving up the whole media sort of relations, etc. Next, there is America. If Donald Trump wins the Republican nomination and the presidential election, who would be his man in Britain? Neither Keir Starmer nor other Labour politicians, nor Rishi Sunak, nor any new Tory leader. Instead, Trump's interests here would be protected, surely by his old mucker Farage. Remember, when Trump tweeted that Farage would do a great job as Britain's ambassador to Washington, this time around, the latter could do even better. For rather than Britain's ambassador to Trump, which is what the job may soon become, Farage would be Trump's ambassador to Britain. Take that, Foreign Office. Up yours, snotty Remainers. All your your pointy heads at Oxford's PPE degrees. And that's that's something I'd never thought. What if Trump did win and then made Farage his ambassador to Britain? I hadn't considered that. That is something new. But it is something equally would be really weird and probably not really wanted. But of course, Farage would try and push hard for that much wanted USA UK trade deal. And as we've said before, even if you got a Trump presidency, it ain't likely to happen. So, back to it. It would not be easy to, of course, reconcile working flat out for reform in Britain with pro-Trump activity with America, as in 2016 and 2020. Third comes the factor that Farage himself acknowledged openly this week, saying, "I'm still bruised by the 2015 general election, which I fought very hard for over 4 million votes and 1 seat. I'm going to think very hard before I have to try and take on that system again," he said. Tom Standard once wrote that it was not the voting that's democracy, it's the counting. And whether one likes it or not, the British general elections are fought under the first past the post, which has tended since the Second World War, with the exemption of the turbulent 1970s, to deliver long periods of centre-right and centre-left government. Even a collapse into 165 seats in the general election of 1997, the Conservatives' worst result since 1832, failed to break the blue-red duopoly and open the door to a fourth party. Some even claim that the Tories will go down even lower at the next election to 100 seats, say. Even so, and that's a rather big if, that would be 100 seats more than Reform UK is likely to win. But then what happens to the Conservatives after that? If we do generally get the Conservatives down to 100 seats, which is not, it's not impossible, although it is quite hard, but again, would be fantastic to see. That would make the Conservatives a completely ineffectual opposition. This is why we've said many, many times before, the more Tories we get rid of, the less an effective opposition they are going to be, which is going to give Labour a more free hand to do a lot of really good progressive things. And I really do still believe that they can do that and deliver on a lot of progressive things. So, throwing all his energy into the next election would make sense for Farage if he were to simply want to pulverize the Conservatives, assuming that reform takes more support than from them than from Labour. But what would follow? Most likely a long, messy, protracted, inconclusive back and forth between a party with seats in Parliament and one with none. According to Tim Bale and Geoffrey Daly, the bigger a Tory defeat, assuming it happens, the larger the proportion of Conservatives MP who voted for Sunak in the 2022 leadership elections. One can imagine a post-election scenario in which one of many Tory activists clamour for a defeat for a deal with Farage. Most Tory MPs would oppose one, and then the right-wing entertainment industry would push for a new right-wing party. My reading of Farage is one of a very gregarious facade that conceals one of a bitter loner. No entry into politics via journalism or even a spad dom for him. No internship, A-list, think tank service. No university degree. Instead, he has worked his way up from village halls via Europe to reality TV over 30 long years, making and then moving on from UKIP and the Brexit Party. Perhaps it would be different if he had been given a knighthood or a peerage after Brexit. He would have surely have had. For, like it or not, campaign for Leave was no less public service than campaigning for Remain. Farage devoted over a quarter of a century to try and persuade Britain to leave the EU, and it would not have happened as it did if he hadn't been there. But a word of warning to Conservative MPs. The good fortune that Farage has enjoyed in his journey to celebrity does not seem to rub off on those who draw in his orbit. Mark Relis, Douglas Carswell quit the Conservatives to become UKIP MPs. Today, the first has since changed party a further 3 times, and the second no longer lives in Britain. Farage at 59, a rubbery, eluberant 59, but 59 nevertheless. Does he really fancy a decade's prospective work to try and recast the right, with no certainty of an elected office at the end of it? Or will he chuck his oar in this year for the sheer fun of trying to smash the Conservatives up? If that happens, and then if he can. No wonder Farage is so popular, at least in some quarters. He's never been in government and has never been responsible for anything. But even he must find a second Trump term presidency hard to sell here in Britain. But whatever happens, he will continue on his merry way, trolling the Tories, spooking their leadership, and upending their conferences by just simply turning up. Oh, Nigel, you're just such a tease. So honestly, that casts to me, if we take that as a reading of this is how Conservatives should react to that actually you shouldn't take Nigel Farage that seriously, then we'll have to see what happens. I mean, who knows? Maybe in a couple of months' time, if Nigel does return to frontline politics and does return for the explicit reason to try and smash the Conservatives just for the sheer fun of it, in order to try and, I don't know, get some sort of revenge for, I don't know, not doing Brexit properly, not, seeing to the asylum system, etc. properly, then ultimately, I think you could see that tune change very quickly from being, oh, Nigel, you're such a tease, to, oh, Nigel, you are now a thorn in our side. And to be honest, that does seem to be Farage's current reason for existing, being a bit of a troll, being a bit of a ghost in the closet, spooking the Tories constantly. And bear in mind, he does that and he pushes them ever further towards the right in trying to sort of adopt their positions. And bear in mind, there is no one on the left, no party, no political figure at the moment who is doing that on the left either. There is no left-wing version of Nigel Farage. Like it or not, at the moment, the UK consistently slips between centre-left to centre-right. By the looks of it, we're going to go back to a centre-left government. And to be honest, it's going to be far better than having a current right-wing government that came in as well, masqueraded as centrist left, and then steadily and slowly just shifted ever and more further right. It's going to be a lot better, to be honest. But the idea of if Farage would return, I think would spook the Tories. I think it would worry them quite a bit. And of course, what does Farage do when he gets back in power? Does he actually want to try and maybe spend the next decade trying to recast the right wing here in the UK? And bear in mind, as was mentioned there, that did happen in Canada, but that took a long time to do. Took well over a decade for that to happen. Or, as was, I think, more likely option, he just does it for the fun of it. He just goes back into the fray just for the sheer fun, just to troll the Tories, to try and break them up even more. But as we said, we'll have to see what happens. We will have to see what happens with Nigel. But to be honest, he is, and I will agree with the end of that article, he is being a massive tease to the Conservatives. But as always, let me know what you think down below in the comments. And of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.